Look,
Yeah.
look.
What's up?
Hi. Everything's fine, and the work is good as far as it goes. But we're definitely getting a lot in the comment section. Look, let me just break it down this way. Our audience, these are people who consume global news. You know, they come here to find out what's happening in the Italian elections. They find here to find out what's going on with that pipeline going into Germany. You know, they come here also sometimes to relax to hardcore improvisational stylings.
Yes.
But what they don't come here for is canoodling. And what I'm seeing in the comments is a lot of people talking about canoodling. And so I'm hoping that we can pull that back and that we can buckle down.
Is
May-
it
maybe-
canoodling like not like a kind of noodle?
No, it's maybe because we ate.
Okay,
Is it
look, we're not
ramen?
doing a bit about the canoodling. And what's more, besides the canoodling, is that I'm going to be naming the songs from now on. Because frankly, last
Really?
time I think like you might have just made up those song names just on the fly.
Maybe
And
the canoodling
look,
is just-
for us, a song isn't just some sort of improvisational, number. It's a messaging opportunity, and that's the point of the show. That's the point of the show, and that's the point of this segment and all the segments. Okay. From the Delta to the Falls, from the Grotto to the newly constructed Defense Ministry building, nothing captures the rhythm of Ecuadorial Fredonia like Cadre cigarettes. Never a rough puff with Cadre, sponsors of the Committee Program.
La imagen por la cual vale la pena arriesgar la vida, sacrificarse hasta la muerte en los campos de batalla de todos los continentes del mundo.
Live from West Berlin, it's the Committee Program with Arun Chaudhary, Julia Doubleday, Forrest, Lovette, Fiamma, Meli, Castrati, and yours truly, Jacopo Castelletti. We begin the show backstage with the Committee Orchestra starring Mild Panning and their hit, Perfectly Normal for an Aid. This is the Global News Rodeo with Arun Chaudhary and Forrest Lovette.
Hi, my name is Arun Chaudhary, and welcome to the Committee Program. I am your host, and this is your Global News Rodeo. And I'm actually bringing it to you from the same hotel room in Lithuania that I brought you the Cooking with Comrades from last week, although I've been a couple places in between. But actually, the world has changed, even though my hotel room hasn't. And now, of course, we do find ourselves with a high-grade conflict going on between Russia and Ukraine. And on this first segment, your Global News Rodeo, Forrest Lovette has curated world events like he always does, but has actually put a couple different viewpoints on what's happening on the ground there. And I think that that's great because you need to read a really wide variety to even start to begin to understand what's going on, because lots of people have lots of vested interests in having you believe entrenched narratives. And it's possible, just possible, that almost every source that you're reading from, one could say both sides, but there are many sides, is not totally telling you the truth. Could be. Could be. Let's go. Item 1. When it all began, which was Thursday, February 24th, 2022 at 5:07 a.m. Politico Europe is reporting that there is an ongoing full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russian troops. At the current moment, major cities are under bombardment from the air, land, and from the sea, including the capital, Kiev, and I would also add, most notably, Kharkiv, which is the second biggest city and is, much closer to the Russian border, and Odessa, where my people are from, which is just on the Black Sea. Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a televised speech early Thursday morning launching the attack, saying Ukraine needed to undergo demilitarization and denazification. Minutes after the message, Russian tanks were seen crossing the border in Crimea and other locations. This action comes after Putin recognized the two separatist regions as independent and multiple failed attempts of diplomacy by Western leaders to stop it. That's in the Donbas region. European officials called on an emergency summit on Thursday evening and decided on a series of new sanctions to impose. They agreed on massive sanctions in a block of finance, energy, and transport, but they decided against kicking Russia off of the SWIFT payment system, going against the wishes of Ukrainian President Zelensky. A top Zelensky aide told Union News the sole goal of Russia is to enter Kiev and destroy the leadership of Kiev. Personally, Zelensky. It is sort of interesting, and I'm going to be editorializing a lot on this, but not with a strong point of view of what I want you to believe. But it is interesting that Zelensky was not, say, any kind of shady American clandestine efforts first choice to be the president of Ukraine. Item 2, an imperialist at heart, the West and Putin have much in common. Socialist workers reporting Vladimir Putin's latest declaration of war against Ukraine clearly shows his imperialist intentions. I think this word is maybe causing controversy of some people who would say imperialism has to have certain characteristics. Does this aggression have that? I think it sort of doesn't matter. You know what I mean? I think this is sort of parsing a false dichotomy as if we were still in some kind of ideological Cold War instead of just a naked power Cold War. Breaking away from any socialist tradition, Putin said in his address to the nation on Thursday that the Russian Revolution of 1917 was to blame for Russia's current state. He went on to say modern Ukraine was entirely and fully created by Russia, more specifically the Bolshevik Communist Russia. This process began practically immediately after the 1917 revolution, and moreover, Lenin and his associates did it in the sloppiest way in relation to Russia, by tearing from her own pieces of historical territory. I mean, this was a game, I think it's sort of blaming this on Lenin is a bit much. I think the Soviets played the same game a lot of Russians have with kind of these territories and keeping the empire together and moving populations. And, when we talk about Crimea, it's actually where Tatars are from. Everyone has not gotten to stay where they are. The border between Armenia and Azerbaijan was the result of lots of moving of populations around. This kind of imperial engineering is for sure not unique to Russia, for sure not unique to the Bolsheviks, and for sure not unique to Lenin. And so I think this is this kind of frame from Putin is interesting, right? Because it's both the de-Bolshevization of Russia and the denazification of Ukraine sort of at the same time. It's a lot of D things. It's a lot of work being done there. Item 3. West versus East in the Global South, soldiers released in Central Africa. African News is reporting 4 captured French soldiers operating the Central African Republic have been released. The men were accused in social media of wanting to assassinate the head of state. The soldiers were of French, Italian, Romanian, and Bulgarian descent and working security for the UN peacekeeping force. The French government said this act was a gross manipulation and has accused the Central African Republic of being complicit in a campaign against France orchestrated by Moscow. Moscow, on the other hand, points its fingers at Paris for accusing the Wagner Group, a Russian military contractor in the region, for seizing resources and power. Item 4. A little goes a long way. France extends abortion limit. Euronews is reporting the French Parliament has voted to extend the deadline for abortions from 12 weeks to 14 weeks. This places France at the same limit as Austria and Spain, while in the UK it is 24 weeks. The French health minister was quoted saying the vote was a step towards greater pragmatism and equality, and continued, today is an important day for sexual and reproductive health and an important day for women's health. A motion to reject the bill by anti-abortion activists and the right-wing MPs was denied. According to the bill's supporter, each year 3,000 French women are forced to go abroad for abortions because they passed the legal time limit. I mean, that's good, because actually we see when you're looking worldwide, reproductive rights are definitely sliding, and that's not just in America, but that is, of course, especially in America. And before we go, I would just say, if you have repro dollars you are looking to donate, don't forget about Abortion Access Front, who actually make sure the money goes directly into supporting abortion care and into the independent health clinics that make it happen. Thank you.
Ciao and welcome to your polling predictions on the ones updated bi-monthly by your committee program. In Sweden, Ipsos and other forecasts call for continued social democracy as everyone's favorite Labour Party continues to lead the pack with their new Prime Minister in tow, although continued strength in the Conservative Moderate Party and Swedish Democrats prevents welfare utopia from proceeding unimpeded. In Colombia, per De Texeco, we have high approval ratings for the three highest performing candidates: Galan for the Liberals, Maquets from the center-left SPA, and Fajardo of the ASI Indigenous Party at 53, 51, and 45% respectively. Similar story in Pakistan per Gallup, where the Chief Minister approval ratings are running fairly even in the mid-50s for Mehmood Khan, PTI centrist, Murad Ali Shah, PPP centre-left, Usman Buzdar, PTI centrist, although Mr. Khan has improved his position considerably since this was last measured at the expense of the other two. In Japan, we see the conservative LDP party dominating party identification with 47% of the Japanese people choosing blue. The closest center-left party, the CDP, blows in at just 8 points, this per ANN polling. Sigma Conseil is reporting that Tunisia should have a close parliamentary election with the right PDL party hovering at 32%, roughly where Zayed's party likewise occupies. We are finally seeing temperatures plummet for the once hot Labour Party of New Zealand led by Jacinda Ardern, but current surveys from Oceania elects have just behind the right-wing National Party. Finally, in Costa Rica, we are seeing initial looks at a blowout against the ruling center-left PAC party. From our staff here at the polling channel, thank you so much for watching and farewell. This is Sunday Interview in Sweaters.
Hi, and welcome back to the committee program. I'm your host, Arun Chaudhary, and on today's Sunday Interviews in Sweaters, we have a dear friend of mine, Kerric Harvey, who is a professor at the George Washington University, and who I have deep and important conversations about communications and its relationship to fiction, especially. One of the few people who will tolerate these conversations. And in fact, the last time we spent time together was actually for a play that you had written that was performed on public radio that we were able to talk about, which was sort of almost in real time play about the events of January the 6th and the reflection in the media. Similarly, we had a conversation that I wanted to expand upon with you because I think it's something we've been talking about on the show a lot. And that has to do with law enforcement communications. And we had been talking about, and then I will be quiet and you can recollect that we did indeed talk about it and say hello to everyone. But we had been talking about sort of how law enforcement and access and kind of this harmonious relationship between the culture industry and the law enforcement community not only has sort of put a lock on the messaging about what law enforcement is and does, but also kind of shifted to the side some previous, maybe more countercultural narratives we had, kind of starting from the highwaymen leading up to the private investigator, to Sam Spade, to, people who could live in this world. And I'll back up a bit, but just say hello to everyone and hi, and it's just so great to see you.
It's so great to be here. And Arun, it's so, as always, so wonderful to see you too. It really is. And I'm so glad you wanted to go back and talk about some of this stuff because it's interesting, I think, in both forward-facing and backwards-facing directions. It's where we came from in the popular culture to get to where we are in real life society. It's looking at entertainment programming almost as an archaeological relic that lets us, if we can only decode that, it then gives us insight into the present day landscape. And that's, God knows we need as much of that as we possibly can get. So I'm thrilled that you want to chat about this some more.
Yeah, and just, it always comes back to sort of these 20th century figures who still dominate our kind of cultural landscape just because this is, the beginning of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. But, I think it is the sort of the rise of radio and the rise of J. Edgar Hoover are not coincidentally at the same time. And I think, even as I think we'll expand this conversation and bring in scholars of communication and bring in some historians and folks from who study judicial justice, but it seems pretty clear that he had a good idea, and that's we know the stories, we have access to the criminals, we have access to the cops. If you want to tell good stories, we can provide you with this. I mean, this continues today.
Absolutely, and it continues today, both in terms of entertainment and genre entertainment in particular. We'll come back to that in a second maybe, but also in terms of everything, all kinds of political communication, whether it is campaign rhetoric, whether it is putting together news headlines, which is not supposed to be political communication, but which is, whether it is advertising for cultural products that then relocate the purchaser in a different place within sort of the societal pecking order. I'm thinking, of course, of the things like makeup and fast cars and expensive clothes, but you could also extend that to to what websites you look at, to what kinds and amounts of firearms you buy. I mean, it is the lines between the membranes between anything to do with culture and anything to do with politics, anything to do with communications, and anything to do with consumerism. Those four different sets of categories have really all kind of blended together. And I think that's probably because we're at the intersection of technology, a big shift in technology, and an even bigger shift in how politics and culture inform and counter-inform each other. And some of that's been deliberate. Some of that's been deliberate, and people have talked about that a lot in the public sphere. I remember very clearly the first time I saw a high-level political operatives book in, I think it was Kramer Books and Afterwards bookstore here in D.C. in the front window, in a display that is usually reserved for fiction, and it was Peggy Noonan's book about the being part of the Reagan presidency. That was a shift, moving from politics into something close to entertainment. And what you're talking about with J. Edgar Hoover, which is absolutely incandescent as an insight, is kind of going the other way. It's moving from real life into seizing the frame within which entertainment programming about that aspect of real life then takes place. And if you can command the narrative, you can command the perception. So for J. Edgar Hoover to say, oh, there's this new interest in police shows and enforcement shows, in anything to do with defending the nation, both inside and outside of national boundaries, let's make it easy for them, for the people who otherwise might be our critics, by bringing them into our circle of special access. Not only will they then feel sort of, if not indebted to us, but part of us at somewhat level, but we will get to supply to them things that they need and things that they think they need, and thus get to turn off the spigot for things that they don't know about and we don't want them to have. So it's that, again, it's that seizing the mic, that grabbing the frame, that the narrative frame that melted some of those boundaries, going in the direction from the real world into entertainment, and into the cop show genre.
And I think, the cop show genre, which stays with us not just because of this reason, but for something else, or I think that J. Edgar Hoover had insight into, which is this idea of the emotional satisfaction of watching process. And sort of, it's why cooking shows, police procedurals, all these things are sort of can be so popular, is this feeling of watching process. And that at the heart of that is, am I getting the authentic stuff, right? Are the Grey's Anatomy's doctors actually dripping out real operation words, right? I want to think that they are. Do even the Star Trek jargon hang together? I'm going to buy a guidebook to make sure that it does. And so I think this knowing, people are sort of even willing to hang up a lot of even what they know. The story might be then changed to help the cops. But who cares? The gun is now the real gun, and somehow that's like the real thing, and the car is the real car. And so the people are sort of willing to sacrifice a lot for this idea that the process is
and
right.
the process is, and I think you're 100% accurate with that. And we see that over and over again in different types of shows that are based on alternative worlds that have to be built through that kind of process. So think about Game of Thrones and the whole Harry Potter thing. When you mentioned Star Trek, it used to just be confined to science fiction, where people got to see the process by which a whole civilization rolled itself out. And part of being in that audience was, just like you say, also kind of knowing the inside scoop, knowing the words to use, knowing the expectations, knowing that this kind of spell is dangerous to use in a full moon, that kind of spell is fine to use at any time. There's a real thirst for that. And we see that go back to before the law enforcement and the police show stuff. We also see that go back to crime, the American fascination with how the mafia works. You know, it's a subculture with a code of honor, with everybody knows their place, but there's room for ambition and movement. There's specialized equipment and specialized language, and relationships are complicated but dynamic. They may terrify you, but they're certainly not going to bore you to death. And all of these things that you're talking about, that we're talking about, are ways for people to step outside the process of their own lives that have become so familiar that they risk being not just boring but kind of stultifying, and kind of being armchair ethnographers into some other more exciting place. Now, when you attach that to what, I never thought about it this way, but when you attach that to what J. Edgar Hoover was doing, you've kind of got a double payoff going on for people, because not only is it the satisfaction of watching process play out, and watching process play out in a way that is an exoticized version, a slice of your world that gets blown up, even if it's just your world in the imagination, that gets blown up into a whole created culture. But all of that is attached to power. All of that is attached to the wielding of power, to the reining in of power. You know, we've got power, you're a criminal, you shouldn't have power. To the distribution of power, to the, you know, the ultimate.
Or you're a criminal type, you
unless
shouldn't have power.
You know, you're a criminal type, so you shouldn't have power unless we elect you, and then you're somehow not sanctified, but you're somehow accredited with the right to use that power that if you were just a normal person would have had you in jail by now. So it's this really strange, complicated, but incredibly rich thing that's happening here. And I love how you're talking about some of the classics, some of the old and the historical versions of these kinds of shows, because for one thing, that's what I mean by it's backward facing and forward. It's a Janus thing. It's backward facing and forward facing at the same time in its terms of its importance. But it also makes me think about, at first I thought this is probably a uniquely American phenomenon, but it listening to you talk, it really is anything but. But ethnographically, it's fascinating to look at what categories of character inhabit these different types of enforcement shows, cop shows. So, for instance, if you look at what the British put on, they love their police, their private detectives, their unwilling one-off sworn-in sheriff type people, but mostly their private detectives. They love them to be religious figures as well. They love them to be vicars. They're all. Yes. How many vicars do you see running after criminals? Right. And often they're not people who fit the cultural stereotype of body height to weight ratio. You know, they're more like everyday people, but they're vicars or they're ministers or they're priests. If they're not that, then they're deeply damaged people. We do that too in the United States. They're starting with Sherlock Holmes. They have drug addictions, right? That again would have, if they weren't chasing criminals with if they weren't chasing criminals who help bring drug addiction, let me start that again. I'm so excited. If they weren't chasing criminals who help bring drug addictions into play for so many people, these private investigators' drug addictions of their own would make them criminals. It's this alchemical effect that is just phenomenal. So the British like Vickers. Both the British and the Americans occasionally like psychics. And what do you do with that? What do you do with people who speak to the dead, spend time in the beyond, are surprised when they open the refrigerator to find things there that belonged to people who died long ago and far away and they haven't seen since before then, but suddenly Igor's health drink has manifested inside my refrigerator 10 years after he's dead. I mean, I can only begin to start taking apart what that means culturally, right? That it's just screaming, deconstruct me.
Yeah, and maybe it's sort of searching for ambiguity in here, both scientific and moral ambiguity, because of what's been lost by the J. Edgar Hoovers of the world, right? That maybe in, providing this extra great process, we are also, as you said, defining power in an extremely clear and clarion way, in black and white. While the private detective and all these things did enjoy this gray area, I'm helping someone despite them being a criminal, despite them maybe even being morally suspect as well as judicially suspect. I am maybe exposing the police for being judicially suspect. These kinds of things that don't happen anymore. I mean, what do you think the effects are of sort of washing this out? What we must, as much as we enjoy the process, we must look for the transgression someplace, right? I mean, that also seems like it would be in us.
I think so. I would hope so. To kind of get to that point, which is a really crucial point, I want to linger for a minute and hear you linger too on this division between private detectives and police in terms of who is kind of the enforcement agent of choice right now, of audience choice right now. And there was a point, not so long after the Second World War, really, where that started to shift from the cop as hero to the private detective as damaged hero. And for one thing about that, of course, is private detectives aren't bound by the same institutional laws and codes and rules that police are. And so that says something about, I don't know, a contemporary need to operate outside structure, possibly outside of law, even while enforcing law. Some deep self-contradiction, not even a paradox, some deep self-contradiction in that psyche. But another thing that being a private detective does is it lets you play it both ways. You can play both sides. You can be just a regular person, and you can be an agent of the state, even though you don't owe anything to the state. You're not official with the state. You get access, you kind of let into the locker room, so to speak, in law enforcement. The cops know you, they give you tips, you give them tips, you have an uneasy working relationship.
There's sometimes a grudging respect, right? That's sort of at the heart of maybe the humor of a lot of these things.
The grudging respect that's absolute. We could do an entire book on this called Grudging Respect. But then the other thing, so there's that ambiguity that you were talking about that plays out. But then the other thing is, when you're a private detective instead of a police officer, is you get to decide when you're going to actually bring somebody in and when you're not. There's room for ambiguity at the level of individual agency.
Personal expression.
Yes, personal expression. Like, I know that you just, blew up all those buildings and ran all those drugs and did all that awful stuff, but I really think you have it in you to reform. And so if I put you in the prison system, we know it's only going to get worse. So I'm going to make a moral choice above the ethical code of my profession, because I'm not a cop, because I'm a private detective. And so I get a chance to do that. And I'm going to give you a second chance. Whereas if I were a cop, I have to bring you in. So it really the private detective, by being less than a cop institutionally, kind of gets to be more than a cop in terms of their own self-expression, their own morality, and power. Then they
less than a cop institutionally is so true, because like how much do they bake into the cake of all of these guys exactly what their expenses are, 10 cents a day, you know, like it really sounds like this horrible wage work, right?
Yeah.
Well, you sort of, in a cop show, you never, you know, we assume that they get paid regularly on time and envelopes that go directly to the bank. Like it's probably all very, like, you know, they're enjoying a socialism the rest of us could dream of.
Yeah, and
it's such an emphasis.
Such an emphasis, and you know, that's another thing is, I mean, that maybe crosses another strand of how people measure themselves against each other, which is how much money do you make? I mean, that's everybody from Alexis de Tocqueville to, I don't know, Trevor Noah, really. Everybody smart along that continuum of incredibly smart has commented on the American habit of substituting income level for any other criteria of worth, both for individuals and for groups. So that would then be kind of something that props up the basic, you know, just plain social power you have of being liminal, of being kind of a cop but not a cop. The flip side of that, you get more power because you get to decide things that are outside the rules, but you have less stability because you're not on payroll. So so you got to make up for that somehow. But then the other thing I want to get to that came at the end of our discussion with that class was how journalism enters into all of this. And I can't help but, I've thought about it a little bit since, I can't help but feel like there's actually an archetype under the archetype, an even deeper archetype in terms of explaining not just the enjoyment, but the fascination with this particular genre. And that's the idea of the renegade or the vigilante, that the people you really put your faith in are people who have no faith in anything else. The people you can trust are people who are outside any kind of organization or any kind of institution. They go it alone. And so you can almost see that movement, that transference, getting less institutional and more vigilante as these genres move through broadcasting history. So you start with, you know, with cop shows, cops as the good guys, unequivocally be good guys. Then you kind of have the shadow version of that with a whole chapter of film noir after the war, and maybe 10, 20 years after that, the whole Godfather series, the whole mafia organized crime series. And then you move into all of these vicars and psychics, and sometimes veterinarians get pulled into it. People who don't really want to be private investigators, but they end up being so.
Reluctant heroes,
again, another trope, reluctant heroes. But then you move into, at some point, probably around Watergate, there is this transference from private, everything that was the styling, the detailing, the clothing, the coat of many colors for a private detective that is more tattered but more interesting than the uniform coat of an actual police officer. That wardrobe got hijacked for journalism, and journalists
totally right, the actual stitching,
and journalists became the vigilantes. They became the place that was going to hold the group that was going to hold everybody else to account, totally bypassing the bedrock reality that they work in a commercial industry. They work
increasingly centralizing even as this thing is happening, right? As this change is happening.
Even as it's happening. They work for a corporation.
This ain't 10 cents a day plus expenses.
Right. Yeah. And by 1099 form, because they work for big business. You know, all of the main, whether you're talking about something that started out like BuzzFeed, whether you're talking about like a social media aggregator station that gets bought up by a bigger social media fish, whether you're talking about legacy media that just keeps chewing each other up, that the cannibalistic nature of the political economy of the news media is just mind-blowing. It's always been a little bit that way, but man, we are talk about Hunger Games at this point. And the more it centralizes, the more commercial it is, the more institutional it is. And the minute something is an institution, it has two jobs. One job is protecting itself as an institution, its own longevity. And then the second job is whatever it was created to do in the first place. And it's always in that order of priority. So journalists are probably the least desirable people, if anybody's desirable, to be a vigilante in this whole lineup. But they're the ones who occupy that space now. And it's through this morphing of sometimes overlapping, but basically this morphing from cop show to private detective to borderline kind of hard drinking, drug taking, self-destructive private detective. Bogart gave us a few glimpses into how that was going to, should I say, blossom, how that was going to come to pass. But it's nothing like, Kate Winslet's series, the mayor of I think it's Eastham, that's going to be sweeping awards this year, and she's doing a fabulous job in it. But as a genre, it just keeps downshifting, really. And here's, when you said, we were talking just before this about somehow it's different to have the journalists in that job than even private detectives. Part of it is that the stakes are, for me, part of it is that the stakes are so uneven. If you're a private detective, if you're a cop, if you're a damaged private detective, you're still out there at some point in a deserted warehouse in the dark or on the street. You're still in a place where people who are dangerous, to whom you are trying to be dangerous, can turn that around and hurt you. If you're a journalist, yeah, you might put yourself in, I'm talking in domestic now, not war correspondence. Yeah, not international. Yeah. If you're a journalist of the kind of, the way most journalists are, you may be breaking stories where you are putting yourself at some degree of risk, but it's not the same kind of everyday will I come home tonight risk that a beat cop has, or Sherlock Holmes, teetering on the edge of a high plateau with the smartest guy in the world,
No, and frankly, I want to break down the wall you've set up and say I think almost a logical conclusion of what we're talking about is, what I just saw a few minutes ago, be push headline on my phone, which is follow along as New York Times journalists are embedded with troops in Ukraine, right? It's for a little bit of access, you can write breathlessly about something like war. We saw Brian Williams waxing poetic, right? It's sort of, the idea of the adventure and getting to be the person sort of overrides even a sense of judgment about it.
I couldn't agree more. And the whole idea of embedding as a good thing in war correspondence is so deeply wrong. I've never understood it, and I understand it even less now. Like you said, for just a little bit of access, you're gonna exchange your independent perspective.
The entire filter, through which you view the world, basically.
It's like a sellout without any money changing hands. I know that people need to do that, but they can do it differently. Look at what happened. Look how people fought their way onto the landing craft for D-Day. They weren't embedded, but they were there. There is an alternative. Yeah. There are alternatives.
That's right.
But
this is such a rich subject. We have to come back to this soon. We are running out of time, and I do also, like I told you before, I'm going to invite other folks into this conversation. We got to take this apart by race and class and gender, because when you think about who the criminals are, right? There's an awful lot of kind of white criminals on the radio and et cetera, in a way that doesn't reflect in the jails at the same time. And so I think there's a lot of tensions here that are incredibly interesting, and people sort of trying to paint a picture of a country of law enforcement and of themselves. But thank you, Kerric Harvey. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for being a friend and always being good for a great talk.
Thank you. I feel exactly the same way. I look forward to more of these and to hearing what other people have to say. It's a great topic and an important one.
Committee, comitato, committed, committeto, corul, committee, we young way, submittee, we committee.
Cadre cigarettes, that smooth, mild flavor that helps you do the people's business. Be a patriot with every puff and enjoy Cadre cigarettes, sponsors of the committee program. With us again is Mild Panning, leading the committee orchestra. Fellas, look, I was sorry about the canuting comments before, and I appreciate you letting me add my stylophone stylings onto that first tune. I feel like a young Alice Coltrane. You've made my dreams come true. Is that all right if I sit in on the second one? We don't have the hard feelings about this.
Get in on it. I mean, you're adding the, what do we call that? The little flair. We need some flair.
We call it the je ne sais quoi. Is what we actually call it. And you guys got your cartons of Cadres, right?
No, we got the cigarettes. I mean, we shouldn't eat a bunch of food
because that's all that's coming. That's it. That's if you look in the contract, that's actually what it is. Okay, so just want to make sure we're square.
Next time we won't eat before we play. We got a little tired, but the cigarettes
I wouldn't recommend it. Count it off, please.
Help. All right, here we go. All right, here we go. Ready?
Ladies and gentlemen, Mild Panning leading the committee orchestra, Josh Carruthers, Ray Loki. We appreciate you both so much. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for the cigarettes.
La imagen por la cual vale la pena arriesgar la vida, sacrificarse hasta la muerte en los campos de batalla de todos los continentes del mundo.
And now, the news in really shitty Italian.
Sigarette cadre, la sigarette del popolo, cadre toste come il nostro leader. Bentornati al Committee Program e alle notizie dette in pessimo italiano. Vi aggiorneremo sulle ultime notizie politiche dall'Italia nello stesso momento.
Vi aggiorneremo. Aggiorneremo. Please. Aggiorneremo.
No.
Aggiorneremo.
Aggiorneremo.
Okay, let's try to go. Okay, go on.
Aggiorneremo.
Perfect. Okay, that's good. Le notizie.
Sulle ultime notizie politiche dall'Italia. Politizie dall'Italia nello stesso. Politiche dall'Italia nello stesso momento in cui l'atto con i tempi verbali al presente nella lingua di Dante. Giusto?
Sì, dai. Let's go on.
Ciao Ludo.
Ciao.
Ora che le elezioni presidenziali sono finite, cosa ne possiamo dedurre? A parte forse le idee che la leadership politica abbia ancora meno
a parte
controllo
che
forse l'idea.
A parte che?
A parte forse l'idea che la leadership politica abbia l'idea.
Ok, l'idea.
Sì. Ok, un altro. Ora che le elezioni presidenziali sono finite, cosa ne possiamo dedurre? E parte forse l'idea che la leadership politica abbia ancora meno controllo sui partiti di quanto pensassimo. pensassimo. Prego.
Okay. Well, first of all, Arun, thank you for having me here and for having, dispelled the myth I always had, because I always found very offensive the interpretations that Americans did of Italians, like the SNL caricature, borderline racist as well. But then I just realized that this is actually how Americans speak when they try to speak Italian, so they're not making fun of us. That's how you do it. Okay, that's good to know. Well, I believe that in the recent Italian presidential election, we realized who was for real and who wasn't, and who's up and who knows politics and who doesn't. And what we saw is that Matteo Salvini does not, because he kinda kept gambling and finding new proposal and trying to force everyone, and he failed. That unfortunately Conte for 5 Stelle does not as well, because he couldn't keep his group together. His line was defeated over and over internally. That Draghi, but this was partially predictable as a person that doesn't come from politics. He's a high-level technocrat. Doesn't exactly, because he tried to be elected president of the Republic and failed pretty spectacularly. Although the fact that Mattarella is the new president still works at his advantage, because, that protects him and allows him to go forward. We know that Letta does know how to do politics, because he kept PD together against many odds and enable the center-right to... and basically made the center-right fail, because they said, this time we will not elect another center-left president, and they did elect another center-left president, one that was even a member of PD, because Mattarella was a member of PD back then. And surprisingly, that Di Maio knows how to do politics very well, because he emerged as kind of this force for good that prevented 5 Stelle from doing a back-end deal with Salvini. So,
and this is a big surprise, right? Because usually people, when they talk about 5 Stelle, it's like that they don't get the politics right. It's that very often they kind of don't engage on it.
Yeah, I mean, Di Maio has been historically mocked, and with some good reason, I have to say, often as being incompetent, as being too young, as not being up for the jobs, as not knowing what he talks about. But I have to say, in this last period, between the election of the President of the Republic and even with the Russian crisis, he's keeping a very tight and line as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's not saying anything out of place. He personally went to Russia to talk to Lavrov. He's getting a lot of recognition. Probably he just found very good advisors and decided to follow their advice truly, but it's still a quality. There are many people in politics who do not find good advisor or do not follow their advice. So that's already pretty good.
Con Draghi al sicuro come Prime Ministro, per quanto tempo possiamo aspettarci che...
Come
primo ministro.
Sì.
Con Draghi al sicuro come primo ministro, per quanto tempo possiamo aspettarci che questo governo continui? O è stato solo un altro test per la...
Il governo continui.
Governo continui.
Continui. It's okay. Go
Governo continui.
Continui.
O è stato solo un altro test per la politica italiana?
Politica italiana.
Yeah, this is a very good question, because, on one end, the re-election of Mattarella is kind of the best guarantees for stability. It's Mattarella who wanted Draghi, it's Mattarella who chose Draghi, it's Mattarella who protects Draghi more than anyone else. On the other end, with the election of the President of the Republic, the first signs of electoral campaign started. And now the parties might want to push their priorities. In these very days, today, yesterday, the day before, the center-right started voting against the government line sometimes, for instance, on the Green Pass and on the raising the amount that you can legally pay by cash. And the 5 Stelle as well gave some sign of wanting to find some independence. Now, in my opinion, this will not amount to much, because almost nobody, apart from Meloni, has a clear interest to go to vote now, and therefore why should they? But Draghi has to be politically savvy to navigate this, and he needs to understand that parties still have their political priority. Because what came out, what leaked the other day, is that after these small votes against the government line, Draghi came to the parliamentary leaders of the party and says, Parliament has to do what the government asks it for and has to approve what the government priorities are, and they push forward. And you have, but I mean, he didn't say it like that, but basically you have to do as I say, otherwise I resign. And I'm afraid if he said that, they probably laugh behind his back, because that's not how it works in Italy. We are a parliamentary democracy. Parliament does whatever it wants. Parties have priorities, and as Draghi discovered during the election of the President of the Republic, it's the parties who hold the power. Because, I mean, what they probably said to him or thought is, okay, you and how many divisions, you and how many MPs, you and how many votes. Because in the end of the day, he doesn't have a party. He doesn't have MPs directly answering to him. He doesn't have, a defined political structure that supports him.
Or a mandate, right? That an election gives you.
But I mean, yeah. But in Italy, we're kind of used to it. And that's fine. We had many people who didn't have these things. That's kind of normal in Italy. But those people, if they lasted for a significant amount of time, they understood the importance of parties, of negotiating with them, of finding a point of mediation, of, balancing their priorities. Because in the end of the day, that's exactly what the job of the Prime Minister in Italy is. It's coordinating, is finding a compromising, is, finding a mediation in the government line among all priorities.
Durante il programma abbiamo seguito da vicino l'ascesa, la apparente caduta del Movimento 5 Stelle.
L'ascesa e
che qualcosa che
ascesa. Can you repeat?
Ascesa.
Sì,
ok.
Sì.
Durante il programma abbiamo seguito da vicino l'ascesa apparente caduta del Movimento 5 Stelle.
Ok.
Il parente caduta del Movimento 5 Stelle. Che cosa che accadrà che capoverà le sorti di questa forza politica sfuggente? Capovolgerà le sorti di questa forza politica sfuggente. Politica. Grazie.
Yeah, and by the way, this looks like a lot. I don't know if you've seen a Russian show that is called Ciao Italia, where there are these people who basically pretend to be an Italian show from the 80s, but saying things that makes no sense. Like they pretend to be the Sanremo Festival of music in the 80s, and it's very popular in Russia, and it became popular even in Italy. So I don't know if this... reading in such a way is a covert approval of the recent Russian line. But anyway, or at least a wink toward them. But 5 Stelle, who knows, right? Because but I think not even 5 Stelle knows where they're going. That's the reality, because on one end, it's clearer where they're going, that it seems they're moving together toward the center-left. They are allied with the center-left in many regional elections, in many local elections, and the perspective is to build a political field together toward the national election. On the other hand, they keep imploding, because now they have a fairly, not even covert, but an open war between the former leader, Luigi Di Maio, and the actual leader, Conte, which is even complicated by the fact that now Conte, due to a judiciary appeal to his election, is not even leader anymore. He's leader de facto, but not according to the law. But probably he's doing another appeal and maybe they'll solve it. But they're very divided. They're very fragmented. As always, it's not easy for them to find a common line. And everyone is trying to figure it out what's happening inside them, but they keep, in my opinion, shifting toward chaos because every time there is an important political step to take, like the election of the President of the Republic, they split 2 or 3 ways, internal tensions emerge, and now these conflicts are even very public. They're on the press every day. So, yeah, let's see how it goes. As of now, I wouldn't say in a good direction for them.
Grazie per tutto, Ludovico Manzoni. Oh my God, I never introduced you properly. Who is a campaigner and is right now you're in Brussels where you're a graduate student. And we hope we can check in with you on maybe even some European things and not just Italian politics.
Sure, absolutely.
Introductions at the end is a new thing. Fiamma, let's do that from now on. Introductions at the end, all right? Make a note.
Signed.
Committee, comitato, committed, committeto, carul, committee, we young way, submittee, we committee.
Thanks so much again for joining us tonight on the committee program. You can always support the show by becoming a member on patreon.com/committee program. You can follow us on all of our social media accounts, including on Twitter @CommitteePro, YouTube, The Committee Program, Instagram, The Committee Program, Facebook, The Committee Program. And you can actually visit the Committee Program Company store now at TeePublic, the Committee Program shop. We have a couple of things. We will try to get some more. Special thanks, as always, to our team, Jacopo Castrati, Fiamma Meli, Jacopo Castelletti, Forrest Lovette, and Committee's Deputy Director, Julia Doubleday. Try and look alive out there, folks. It's later than you think.
It's the end of our broadcast day. Thanks for listening. This was the 3rd program in our 2nd series. For more global infotainment from the committee program, click on the video screen right or screen left. Please like and subscribe to the committee program on Sundays at 4 p.m. Eastern and 10 p.m. Central European Time.